So I always like checking with the audience to see if they know who they have on stage. Who here's heard of Loopio? Okay, that's not bad. Who here's heard of Zak? Okay.
It's okay if you haven't.
Yeah, well, I guess that's good if you want the company to be known and not yourself.
Yeah.
Today's fireside chat, there's a lot we could cover. But I think me and you were discussing this before. The teams put the great questions together, but I think I want to focus on your journey, the longevity, and sort of maybe an uncertainty.
So we're throwing all the questions out the window?
No, we're going to keep the questions, but we're going to focus on ones like longevity. So Loopio is now a large company and well known in the ecosystem. But
You tell me, are we?
well, you saw a
Yeah,
lot of hands
yeah.
up there, okay? But I want to take it back to the beginning because you didn't just wake up one day and start Loopio. So how did you start your career, and how tell us about your first work what's the first startup you worked at?
Yeah.
And take us back to when that was.
Yeah, because oftentimes, how many founders in the room? Your hands up? Okay, lots. Yeah, oftentimes our stories predate the companies, right? I think it's one big continuum. I had the pleasure of, right out of school, joining a startup called Achievers, which used to be I Love Rewards. That company is still scaling to new heights today, but we built employee engagement software. When I joined, it was a company of 20 people, no financing, not really doing software. And over kind of 8 years, it transitioned to a software SaaS company. We raised 3 rounds of funding. I had some amazing leaders that I worked for. Actually, over 8 years, I had 11 different managers at that company. I lived in 3 different cities. We went through 3 rounds of financing. It was a boot camp, right, in a lot of ways. And I think doing that from an employee seat, watching the ebbs and flows of a company, watching the emotional ebbs and flows of a CEO that I got to know very dearly as a friend, I think a lot of that prepared me, but it also inspired me to eventually, I thought I was going to be MBA, management consultant type kid, went in a very different direction. So that's I think the backbone of how it all started. And then like many founding stories, so we build RFP response software, so basically automating proposal building and content management for sales teams. I got to spend a couple of years working as a sales engineer, saw the problem firsthand, got an itch to scratch, started building, and then that was kind of the impetus and the inspiration.
Okay. I'm going to take apart that answer a bit to understand
Sure.
better. So you said 8 years of Achievers.
Yeah.
What are the most concrete things you took away that impacted your journey at Loopio?
Yeah. So I think culture, number one. For any of you that know the Loopio story, you'll know that we've been obsessed with how we build culture within the organization. It's been a backbone. I had a founder that I worked for that was very, very obsessed with building a culture that was very open, very transparent, very forward-thinking, very collaborative, very celebratory. And I think I took a lot of those elements with me. I love the value that Jay mentioned around iteration, because I think it was something that we took very early on in our journey as well. I also, how many people work in software development? So I actually attribute a lot of my leadership learnings and a lot of my CEO style to my time in software development as a developer and as an engineering manager. I think that taught me a lot about being very vulnerable, right? Like your code is out there, everybody is kind of like looking at stuff, to be very open, very transparent, very collaborative. I think I learned a lot about teamwork during my time in software development as well. It's just how to be hyper collaborative and constantly communicating. I think that was also a really, really important thing. But yeah, culture was probably the biggest thing, this kind of constant focus on people and the vibe of the organization, and really leaning into values that you believe in as a company. I'd say that's probably the most.
Okay, I'm going to get back to culture in a minute.
Sure.
What false positives, what thing did you learn in that journey that you thought would inform Loopio but was actually wrong and you had to relearn?
So is the question, what did I think was going to be important from my time at Achievers that I thought was going to be important that didn't end up being that important? That's a tough question. Maybe the tactical elements of like how to do specific jobs. I think a lot of stuff you learn along the way. Yeah, like that's probably it, right? It's like I think you like.
So you think you know how to do something, but when you have to do it at your company, it's different.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't age well, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get back to culture, you co-founded this with You got two co-founders. How did you find them? How do you know they were the right people to start a company with? Then we'll get back to culture after that.
Yeah. So co-founders are, I love talking about kind of co-founder dynamics and sustaining healthy relationships with co-founders. I think it's such an important part. I love the comment that was made in the earlier presentation about co-founder relationships and the skill of the founder as a stage of life. I had two co-founders. One of them I worked with at Achievers for a few years. We built software together, we managed teams together, and the other one I went to school with. We were in the same Frosh Week. We always dreamt about starting a company together one day, but I had never actually worked with. So I brought the two together. We had the idea, and we just started building. So really, from my personal life, Alex.
How do you know the right people to start a company with?
How do you know that your partner was the one you wanted to marry? I think it's like at the end of the day, it's.
Sorry.
I think co-founder stuff, okay, so the few things that stand out, tangible things that stand out. Number one is we had complementary skill sets. We had overlapping skills, but we had complementary skills as well. One of my co-founders, I was technical, my co-founder was more technical than me. I had a business side, but my other co-founder was more business oriented, did his MBA as well. So I think those complementary skill sets. We like to spend time together. We went to concerts together, we hung out together, we would stay up late at night together talking about things. And so I think the classic airport test, and can you spend time with people, I think is really, really important. But so I don't think it's just about that. Like anybody who's been in a long-term relationship in any capacity in your life, co-founder relationships have to be nurtured, right? Like you're just humans at the end of the day going through this experience, and you are also evolving as the company is evolving. And for those of you that are building, you'll know that startups are extremely intense, extremely emotional. I think I learned that the hard way a few times. And so I think, how do you systemize the nurturing of your relationship with your co-founder? I can tell you one thing that we did that was super helpful in the early days. Every week, we made sure we had at least one meal together as co-founders.
At work or outside work?
Every Wednesday morning, when it was just the three of us, we would meet for breakfast at 7:30 in the morning, and that was a thing, and we just talked and made space, and then once the company got a little bigger, it was lunch. So it was usually we would step outside, we'd bring in external coaches to support us, but it's one of those things that doesn't get talked about enough, I think, in our circles, in our community, is that how important this kind of stuff is. Because what ends up happening is if you don't address those issues and those feelings that are coming up amongst co-founders, they start to fester, and then they start translating into business decisions, or founders will start building teams to create separation between them and their co-founder. Like all these crazy things start happening subconsciously. So I think it's just constantly nurturing and working on that relationship, I think, is something that's super important. I had one of my co-founders transition out of the company about 4 or 5 years ago. The other one is still building with me today, but he doesn't have any direct reports at the time being. He's doing more innovation, forward-thinking stuff. So a lot of different transitions over the years.
So you've explained how you've selected the right co-founders, how you made it work. You've also mentioned that culture, so let's go back to that. So how did you think about culture when you started? How's that changed over time, and what have you done to make your culture work? So a few big questions here.
And I'll be the first to say that our culture is not perfect, right? And it's still constantly evolving. I think it starts like the textbook kind of way of values, right? Like, what are the things that you truly believe in that you want to be known for as an organization, whether it's, iteration or being patient first, or in our case, customer obsessed, right? Like you kind of have to put those things on paper and ingrain them in your organization, from how you interview to how you speak, to how you reward and recognize people. I think that's a table stakes thing of just having core values. A mentor of mine early days said to me, Zach, like the things that you put in place now in your first 10 to 20 employees, those are going to be the kinds of things you try to replicate and scale when you're 200, and that was so the truth, right? So I think those early days, you start to put those rhythms in place of, what are those company heartbeats and those events or those kind of motions or processes or things that are going to be unique to you. You got to think 2-3 years in the future, and you're going to be much bigger, and you want those things to last. I think you have to plant those seeds for, like we had our weekly socials, our Ask Me Anything sessions with the leadership team. I think all of those rhythms you got to plant really early, because do you ever read like James Clear, Atomic Habits? He talks
Yes.
about like systems instead of goals, right? I think like, how do you systemize your culture? How do you turn it into repeatable things that are part of the fabric of the organization? I think you plant those seeds and you turn them into things that kind of live on their own.
And so for context, how many employees are you right now?
So we are, for context, we are about 300 employees now. We are operating, like 85% of our team is still in Canada, which is great. We have about a 30 to 40% team in India. We have about 10 folks in the UK. Yeah.
So what changes have you made to the culture? So you got these habits, you wanted to project the culture, you had this culture you wanted to build. It's now 10 years later. What have you consciously changed about the culture and why?
I would say the biggest shift, I think over the last couple of years in particular, especially with the economy, we are more performance-oriented now. And I know that sounds weird because I think as a startup, you're always focused on performance, but there's always another gear. I would say that performance and accountability has increased, I think, in the last, because especially as a company grows and people have more, well-defined roles, KPIs, things like that. I think that increase in focus on individual performance and performance management has become more of the fabric of the organization, for sure. But I think if you peel beyond that, I still think like our values of curiosity and candor and support are still very much ingrained in the organization. Even in transitioning to a remote-first company, I still think a lot of our values have held.
Cool. I want to take a step back from culture. I want to talk a bit about your financing path and how it's impacted you. You bootstrapped, then you raised a venture round, then you basically got some strategic investment from private equity. So you basically touched every which way to finance it.
Except for a public.
Well, I thought you were going to announce that today.
No.
Oh, okay. Damn. When you want to do it, we'll break it here. Talk about how each of those financing decisions impacted the company and how you run it, and why you did each one.
Yeah. How many of you are bootstrapping your business right now? Yeah.
Wow.
That's great. Look, there's no single path. I think at any given moment, stage of life is such an important factor. Skill of the founding team, the market, what the market is telling you. All of these factors, I think, dictate. Bootstrapping, really quickly, Alex, I think taught us about being customer obsessed, making sure every single ounce of energy of everything we were doing was actually adding value and that we weren't wasting any time. It taught us how to be fiscally responsible. It taught us how to be scrappy. It taught us how to do all the jobs in the company because you couldn't just hire somebody when you ran into a problem. Raising venture, I think, was more about the injection of confidence than it was about the injection of capital. We raised about $9 million in 2018. And I think that when that happened, it was like a going for it moment where we said, okay, you know what, like, we're gonna accelerate product. We're gonna build an executive team. We're gonna be louder. We're gonna stop being our quiet kind of Canadian selves in a corner somewhere. We're gonna be a lot louder. And I think that's what really changed during that time. And I just started surrounding myself with like higher caliber, not higher, just people that are more experienced than me, right? I was starting to get put into all these different circles that I wasn't before. And then private equity has been a really interesting journey. So that's where the big $200 million investment came in 2021. And for those, have any of you worked in a private equity structure before? Outside? It's different. Yes, there's definitely more focused on profitability. There's more focus on the financials. I would say that it's taught me to be a better CEO because I'm much more in tune with just the unit economics of the business. But you're working with investors that are a lot more hands-on in your business. And so you have to learn how to build an extreme amount of trust with all these different people that are trying to collaborate with you.
So one more question related to financing.
Sure.
How has your relationship with your stakeholders, or at least your investors, changed with each of those backers?
I would say with the venture we raised with OpenView, it was a little bit more, and they were still a minority investor at the time. I would say it was very collaborative, but it was a little bit more passive, like in the sense that there was still the founders kind of controlling and running the company. But I was always of the mindset that when you raise money and you bring partners on your team, on your cap table, like they're partners. You want to listen to them. They have ideas. You want to be collaborative. So I've always been open and collaborative with anybody that's been an investor. But I think with private equity, the relationship is it's just more intense.
Okay.
Like, we're on weekly calls. There's 3 or 4 different projects happening at any given time. But we have gotten stronger as a company. So that's the flip side.
Cool. I have a lot of great questions here, but I'm going to ask a couple more and then open it to the audience, because I think the audience will want to answer something. This one's around uncertainty. One thing you can say about the last, let's say, 5 years, it's been one shock to the system after another. You've had to run the company through COVID, through rampant inflation, through the emergence of AI, which I imagine you've seen 50 different companies trying to use AI to outcompete you, and then this weekend, and then today, who knows, with potential tariffs to software, which I don't even know what that means, because I don't know how you're going to determine what's Canadian and American, but anyways. So you've had, that's the last 5 years. So how do you manage through uncertainty?
Yeah, I think we're all still trying to figure it out. Look, I think it's actually really interesting to hear you connect the dots between all those things, because I think COVID was, the first time I really felt, okay, I'm leading through crisis. And then it feels like since then it's been crisis after crisis. But you're right. It's like the hardest part about that is, especially when you're scaling a company, and a company that is very culture-focused, people-focused, open, and transparent, is that everyone is looking for answers and you don't have them. How do you lead in that scenario? So look, I'm not perfect at this, but I can think that some of the things that I have built a lot of confidence in doing through those experiences: being transparent, being open about the fact that the things that you do know and the facts and the things that you don't know, and just laying those things out. I found that it's also really important to focus people on the things that they can control. And I've had to use that message over and over again and say, hey, these things are out of our control, but here are some of the things that we can control right now, right? We can go add value for customers, and this is how we're gonna go do it. And we're gonna lean on these kind of innovation strategies and focus on these things. And so I think that, bringing people back to the things that are in front of them in terms of what they can control, communicating frequently, showing that you're also trying to figure it out, and the things that you're learning, I think are important as well. And then just being open and honest when you make mistakes. So I think it's this kind of, this motion of transparency and repetition and trying to continue to focus back on tangible things, right? What are things that you can actually do? Businesses are about moving forward every day, adding value for customers, right? You have to keep bringing people back to that, especially now in a remote world with social media the way it is. It's so easy for people to spiral. I think this can be one of your responsibilities as a leader in times of crisis, is just to help people focus.
Cool. I'm going to ask about one particular uncertainty and then open it up to the audience. I think I want to go deep in all of them, but one we actually didn't discuss before is the emergence of AI-first companies. Here you are, established, I think the first or second, in a leadership position in the RFP industry, and then a bunch of every startup says, oh, we're going to completely automate that with AI. How have you managed through that?
It's so funny, our problem space has been around for a long time. RFPs as a concept has been around for the better part of a century. Companies have been, responding to bids and writing proposals, whether it's a public sector, private sector. The first RFP software was probably created in the 90s. So when we came into market, we were disrupting the incumbents. We were coming to market saying, you know what, that's the old way of doing things. And then here we are 11 years later, and there's all these companies coming in saying Loopio is the old way of doing things. And hearing that as a founder is soul crushing, right? Because you're that's my job, is to tell people that's the old way of doing things. And so it's hilarious, first of all, but it's something you have to come to terms with if you're going to be building for a long time, is that eventually, if you do make it to a certain stage, you're going to be the one that's being targeted, and that's a very different feeling as a founder. But I think that's the beauty of that, is that that's the rallying cry. It's are we really, we've worked so hard to get to this point, are we really going to let others? And I think that's when you can kind of go back to it's actually a really interesting full circle experience where it almost forces you to lean more into your organization and get more hands-on and use that as a form of a galvanizing motion to say, you know what, we are going to carve out a new team, and we're going to experiment again, and we're going to build these new things. And so I think that we have responded. We've invested heavily in generative AI capabilities, and We haven't built a whole new product, but we have built numerous capabilities to kind of move forward. But the beauty is we've been able to do it in tandem with customers. Like, and so I think maybe the lesson in thinking it through out loud, Alex, is, how can you find a competitive advantage in every situation? And I think in that situation, it was, look, we have an army of a development team. We have 1,600 customers. Let's use that to our advantage to kind of make the right investments that these small startups can't.
Love that answer. Can I get a round of applause? So we have limited time, but we'll try to get as many questions as possible. So can we get runners? Maybe I'll just run up here and take you had your hand up first. You were quickest.
Hey, Jay, Zach, that was really great. I want to know about remote teams. You said you started by getting together over meals once a week. Now you say you're a remote-first company. What changes when you go remote, and how do you create that culture, that sense of trust and performance when you can't see what someone's working on and tap them on the shoulder?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And look, I'm still trying to find ways to bring back some of that energy that we had in person. And I think so. But to go back to the core of your question, I think you have to find, first of all, like, what are the benefits of remote, and how can you lean into them? So how can you get really good at asynchronous communication, using tools and video, and so kind of almost like using it as a way to find a new competitive advantage for your company? Like, what are the things that you can do in remote that will make you even stronger that maybe you can't do in person, and how do you? So I think that's really important. I think the other thing that's really important is, look, leadership and management, middle management, always really important in organizations, even more important in remote. So being super careful about the leaders that you hire and their alignment to the values of your company, and the support that you're giving them, and how you're bringing managers together to share best practices. I think that's also really important. And then where you can, I think finding ways to bring people together in person just for the sake of relationship building. I think that's something that just you cannot duplicate this, like, in terms of building relationships. So I think still finding those moments as well. But I think a lot of it does go back to, there is a trust element. We're not monitoring people's mouse clicks and things like that. But I think if you use it as a way to mature your performance management and hold people accountable to real results and how you set expectations, you just have to be really buttoned up, I think, in those things. So it's definitely different. There are definitely drawbacks. But I think you got to figure out what those benefits are and really lean into them.
Let's get one more question from one of the runners. Yeah, we see you.
Hello. So
Hey.
I have a question. So how does how was your journey from MVP to getting into private equity? In the sense, what was the most optimal time that you would suggest for startups to give in order to reach the stage where you're ready for private equity? And what were the best recommendations that you can give for startup founders who have already built MVPs?
Okay, so I'll try to cover some of the highlights. I could see Alex laughing because he's like, MVP to private equity, that's like 11 years. Look, I think for us, the way that we did it in the early days, we had the skill set within the founding team to build the first version of our product. So we did. We built the first version. We ran a beta. We gave it away for free for 4 months or so, and really tried everything we could to get it in people's hands to get feedback, and then eventually we converted it to a paid product. And it was not perfect in the beginning, and we just iterated and iterated and iterated for years and years and years, and just kept getting better and better. And we chipped away at it, and that was our journey. But is that how I would do it right now? It depends. Depends on the skill of your team. Depends on the stage of life. Depends on the market. Depends on the competition. Depends on access to capital. All of these things. So there's no perfect path. So I really do think it is about, as a team and your advisors, you got to kind of come up together and figure out the right path forward. But I do think that in the early days when you're building software, getting your platform or tool in the hands of as many people as possible is never a bad idea. And I would lean on that in the early days.
Okay. Can I get a round of applause for Zach? I think that was a perfect answer for an imperfect situation. So thank you so much, Zach. Before I give it back to Marie, I'm going to say I'm sure there's a lot more questions here for Zach. I'm sure there's people that didn't get to do community open mic. What I encourage you to do is put your question for Zach on LinkedIn or your announcement with the hashtag TechTO. The team will gather the questions and try to share them with Zach to see if we can get answers at least in like an upcoming newsletter.
Try to do a video or something. Or
Oh, well, yeah, we can do a video even. We can maybe we can do, Marie can figure out the format.
And I'm gonna stick around for a bit as well. If you want.
Well, Marie's about to announce, I think, our secret private after party where maybe you can go if it's not too far of a walk. So let's give it back to Marie.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Zach. Another round of applause.